New Zealand scientists are taking the next steps in developing forensic brainwave analysis, also known as brain fingerprinting, for solving crimes. The technology works like this. It detects brainwaves that indicate whether or not a person has specific knowledge of something contained in their brain. And it's hoped eventually it could be applied to criminal cases, especially pre-trial investigations, as a way of eliminating possible suspects. Before that, however, any moral or ethical concerns would have to be addressed. Already there have been 2 extensive experiments involving test scenarios on 30 student volunteers and 15 sentenced prisoners. This year, with support from police, the project team, led by University of Canterbury Director of Clinical Legal Studies, Professor Robin Palmer, hopes to apply the technology to real criminal cases. Kia ora, Professor Palmer, welcome.
Hi, Lynn.
9 to Noon spoke to you about this project back in 2016, the early years. Can you remind us about how it works? It's a knowledge detector, I think, rather than a lie detector.
Yeah, there are basically 3 known methodologies to try and detect information for forensic. And when I say forensic, I mean for legal purposes. One is the well-known polygraph, or the lie detector. The other one is a functional MRI, and the third one is using the EEG to detect brainwaves. And this technology is aimed at using brainwaves to see whether a person has specific knowledge contained in their brain or not.
So, in those few years since we spoke to you, what progress has been made?
Made very good progress. In a nutshell, we started with a pilot project. We went to Seattle to meet with the pioneer of brain fingerprinting, a man called Dr. Lawrence Farwell, who also spoke to 9 to Noon when he was out here a year ago, to ensure that we understood the entire parameters of what he was doing, because he's been doing this since the early 1990s. It's not anything new. It's been going for 30 years. Then afterwards we did a pilot project in Christchurch, with a number of students, 4 students. When that was positive, we then developed the latest big project, which is 30 students being tested, and we've just finished yesterday testing 15 sentenced prisoners on the third part of the project.
So what are the findings? How confident are you in the technology?
Well, at the moment we just have preliminary findings, of course. The stage now is it gets written up in a extensive report where all the findings and all the raw data is attached. That gets sent to our collaborators in the UK and the United States at the Harvard Centre for Law, Brain and Behaviour, and to the Institute for Cognitive Neuroscience at the University of London to review what we've been doing. And once we get that information back, it'll be written up and sent out in a number of articles for peer review. So that could take another year or 2. But so far we are pretty confident that the replication that we've done, in other words, we have independently attempted to replicate what Farwell says he has achieved with this technology, and we are fairly confident that the technology appears to be sound. But as I said, it still has to be tested and peer-reviewed.
On our webpage, we have a brainwave pattern from a serial killer case and the brainwave responses. What does this show us? I just want to burrow a little bit more into the science of this.
Well, the way it works is, to simplify greatly, the investigator would find information that is known, would only be known to somebody involved in the particular incident or crime in this case. And what then happens is that information is then combined with irrelevant information and other information relevant to the case, but not the specific information mentioned. The suspect is put in front of a computer screen and then responds to various stimuli. By stimuli I mean words or pictures that are relevant to the crime, some are irrelevant. And then, in a nutshell, if the response is a peak rather than a flat line, that's the P300 brainwave, it indicates that that person has knowledge of that particular item of information. And then the question is, can he or she explain how he or she came across that knowledge? Was it innocently obtained, or was it due to the involvement in the crime?
How would you see this science, this technology eventually working in real life?
Well, if it's verified, and it's a bit of a long road still, because once it's peer-reviewed, to get admitted into court, one of the criteria is that it's got to be widely accepted in the scientific community. And we are the very first university worldwide that has independently done testing over 3 years, independent of the originators and the commercial programs, to see whether it in fact has any value. So we were testing the reliability and the accuracy of the program, particularly Lawrence Farwell's program. So if this science checks out, then it could have major repercussions in various fields, not only in crime detection. It could save enormous resources, because let's say you have 10 suspects. Instead of spending 6 months running around interviewing people, you could take all 10 to a lab, test all 10, send 8 home and say, well, you two now know something about this because your brain indicates you have knowledge of this. Explain how you got to that knowledge. So you can see there are potentially great benefits.
Well, associated with that, given we are talking about criminal cases, will you have to prove a 100% success rate?
The way the program is set at the moment is that if the information present, in other words, that particular, what we call probes, that information only a perpetrator would know, is above 90%, we then make a finding that this is on Farwell's protocols of information present. So the threshold at the moment is 90%. Ideally, it should be 99% or virtually 100% every time. If it's below 90%, and between 70 and 90, it's called, the finding is indeterminate. We can't say whether it's present or absent. And anything below 70% is regarded as absent. So there's a pretty high threshold based on the current protocols that Farwell uses.
Have you been working also on stage 2? Now, this goes into the realm of ethical and legal rights. What are the issues here?
We've done a lot of work on that, but again, all the ethical rights and legal rights depend on the science being verified. So once the science's accuracy and reliability is verified, and we're fairly confident that this will happen in due course, as I said, there's still a road to go there, then there are enormous repercussions when it comes to the ethics of the testing. For example, a number of Maori people, for example, don't like things put on their head, so this requires a kind of a helmet or a headset to be put on your head for the testing. There are the ethics of the investigation, because it can easily be abused by police and other investigators in order to get easy convictions if they are not ethical. Then there are the questions of the legal ramifications. 2 big ones, for example, is getting admitted into court, and that is a pretty high threshold, both in US law and in New Zealand law, which follows the same criteria. And then other implications like search and seizure. Could I get a search warrant to search a suspect's brain, for example, rather than his room? So there are all kinds of legal implications that we have been researching, but the focus at the moment is to try and ensure that the science is verified, because that is the first step.
A search warrant to search a brain. I'm going to be thinking about that for a very, very long time. Robin, thank you. We'll follow this with interest. Talking to Professor Robin Palmer.